I only turned the car around because the silver flash drive wasn't in my bag. Traffic on Providence Road was light, the kind that lets your mind wander, until it shouldn't. The flash drive held revised submittals for 3 retail tenants. Without it, I'd be dead in the water by noon. 10 minutes later, I eased into our driveway, heart thudding with the guilty rhythm of someone who didn't announce her return. The Bradford pears along the curb rattled their leaves, indifferent witnesses to minor trespasses. I unlocked the door quietly, the routine muscle memory of a woman determined not to make a fuss. Our foyer looked like the after photo from a home magazine spread. Console table, framed school portraits, a ceramic tray for keys. The stable we promised we'd be for Emily and Grace. The American flag was rippling lazily from its pole. Safe. Solid. Mine. 2 lives, Margaret said, my husband's mother, her vowels wrapped in soft Carolina gentleness that usually made everything sound like iced tea and porch swings. Today, it carries weight. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I meant to move like breath, unseen. But the dining room held the work laptop I'd forgotten to close. The flash drive sat beside it like a dare. The voices were unavoidable. She trusts you completely, Margaret said. A long pause. That's why this is so dangerous. Robert's reply was a low murmur I couldn't catch. Margaret's voice sharpened. Do not make a fool of her. Choose one life and end the other quickly. Silence followed. No more words, only the faint clink of glass against wood. I pictured Margaret standing at our dining table, the same one where we'd celebrated birthdays and patience and promotions. The woman I'd come to love for its fairness, its loyalty to decency. The woman who'd brought over chicken salad when Grace had croup, who'd sat up with me when Robert flew overnight to Dallas. The woman who was now warning my husband in my own home. I should have announced myself. I should have stepped in, smiled casually, and made a joke about forgetting things more as I get older. Instead, I stood there listening to the shape of a life I didn't know. My pulse a tight wire. The front lawn sprinkler hissed to life outside, a white noise track for the collapse of assumptions. Margaret's voice softened again, back to iced tea. I will not help you lie to her. She is not your mother. She will not forgive this. A quiet exhale. Footsteps. The scrape of a chair. I grabbed my laptop and the flash drive, skirting the doorway like a thief in my own house. Through the dining room archway, I caught a flash of Margaret's blouse, the corner of her pressed napkin, the glass of sweet tea sweating a ring onto a coaster. My own reflection in the glass of a framed photo, Emily missing her front teeth, Grace in pigtails, looked like a stranger's. Margaret's voice again, lower now, like caution, end it this week. More silence, then the faintest whisper of my name, the syllables moving through the air like a warning and a promise both. Elizabeth. I backed into the foyer, clutching the flash drive and laptop so hard my fingers ached. The beveled glass in the front door broke the sunlight into tidy diamonds on the hardwood. The house looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago. I did not. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. I pressed my spine into the cool wall, willing my heartbeat down. I imagined Emily racing scooters across the driveway, Grace's curls damp with summer. I imagined 100 ordinary afternoons that might never have been ordinary at all. I eased the door shut behind me and stood on the porch, a woman unexpectedly untethered. A breeze lifted the edge of the welcome mat and slapped it back down again. I focused on that sound, fabric on concrete, like it could anchor me to this moment long enough to get to the car without falling apart. My phone buzzed, a calendar reminder for a tenant walkthrough at 11:30. I stared at it until the number swam. Then I did what mothers do when their foundations crack. I made a plan to keep the roof up through the storm. I set the laptop on the passenger seat, slid the flash drive into the cup holder, and watched my own hands. They looked steady enough to sign for packages, to braid hair, to pass dinner rolls. They looked steady enough to hold a life together. The engine caught. The flag lifted and fell. I drove away from my house like someone trying not to be followed by her own thoughts. 2 lives, Margaret had said, and she had sounded afraid for me. The stoplight at Randolph and Colony turned red, trapping me beneath a blinking school zone sign. Children with oversized backpacks shuffled across the crosswalk, chaperoned by patients and fluorescent vests. My palms went slick on the steering wheel, not from the rush of a single morning, but from the undertow of older fears I'd kept tidy and boxed. The box blew open. I was 9 again, knees pressed to rough carpet fibers that left hatch marks on my skin. The apartment we'd moved into after my father left smelled like lemon cleaner and resignation. My mother hung picture frames with care, as if she could curate a better story out of thin air. The man she dated swore softly when screws stripped, laughed loudly when the Panthers lost, and drank like hope came in cans. He called me kiddo in a voice I wanted to trust, and pressed his hands on my shoulders in a way that said we were a team while telling my skin to run. "You're nothing special, Elizabeth. Nothing somebody else can't replace," he said once, offhand, as if reading the weather. The wound wasn't in the words. It was in the casualness, the way I learned to take up less space, the way I mastered disappearing in rooms I'd earned the right to fill. At 28, I thought I'd outrun that voice. I'd set new walls. I'd chosen a man whose steadiness promised a life with locks that worked, bills that cleared, and apologies that sounded like action. Robert Harper, heir apparent to Harper & Sons Logistics. He walked into rooms as if he belonged there, and people agreed. The night we met had felt like a scene rotating on a slow-moving turntable. The band's volume dropped just as Robert laughed. He said my name like it was a vow, Elizabeth. He wasn't beautiful. He was compelling. He radiated enough order to make you stand up straighter, check your posture in the reflection of his quiet confidence. "You don't strike me as background scenery," he said on the balcony, studying me with the kind of certainty that made people believe all sorts of things. "I'd come years of praxis," I said, teasing to deflect. "Practice doesn't dim light. It just teaches people to ignore the glare." I married the man who said that. I believed the man who said that would not make me small. I believed his mother's manners meant the family valued dignity that wasn't performative. The light turned green. I drove. The past slid back into its box, but the lid sat crooked now, daring the present to knock it loose again. At 11:28, I parked behind the shopping center and inhaled twice, the way labor nurses teach you to ride a contraction. I led the walkthrough, I smiled at the right times, and made notes that would be legible in a week. Professionalism is a disguise, and dignity both. It got me to 4 p.m., then 6:30. At 7:12, I sat in the parking lot of Emily's dance studio, listening to the chatter of little girls funking water bottles against their cubbies. I watched their mothers, the ones who looked tired and tender, the ones who had learned the weight distribution of carrying groceries and grief. When Emily darted out, glitter flaking from her leotard like miniature applause, I knew something had already shifted inside me. I buckled her in and drove home to a house I was ready to see as if for the first time. The Marriott Ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and corporate ambition. I hovered at the edge of a conversation I was nominally part of, clutching a flute of sparkling nothing and praying someone would say something that didn't sound like a brochure. 2 accountants tried to convince me otherwise, treating one-liners like business cards. "And you are?" one asked, eyes already shifting to a taller woman behind me. "I'm Elizabeth Lang," I said, not offering a hand. "Who do you belong to?" the other said, the question coating my tongue with old dust. Before I could correct him, he corrected himself. "I mean, which firm? Sorry, long day." His smile said he wasn't sorry. "Robert Harper, heir apparent to Harper & Sons Logistics." He wore a charcoal suit cut to the exact width of his shoulders, with a tie knotted with intention. The moment he joined our circle, the hum in the room changed imperceptibly. Not silence, not awe, something else, attention. He didn't clear his throat or search for an opening. He looked at the accountants. They looked back, and like that, the conversation rerouted. "Gentlemen," he said, the steel in his voice wrapped in velvet, "let Elizabeth finish." The accountants retreated. Robert extended an arm. "Fresh air?" On the balcony, night sounds hushed under a dome of hotel light. I gripped the railing, acutely aware of how easily I could become scenery again if I wasn't careful. "You don't strike me as background scenery," he said, eyes sure. "Years of practice," I replied, reflexive deflection. "Practice doesn't dim light. It just teaches people to ignore the glare." I didn't believe in soulmates. I believed in mortgages that got paid on time and in men whose promises matched their calendars. Robert spoke like a man whose follow-through had been notarized at birth. We danced one song. His hand was respectful, his step measured. The band's volume dipped like someone had rolled felt over the speakers. I said yes to dinner the next night. He walked me to my car without touching me again. Somehow it felt more gallant than any kiss. He called the next morning at 9:03. He didn't text. He didn't ask what I wanted to do. He suggested a place, named a time that worked around my schedule, and then kept both. People underestimate the thriller that is competence in an adult man. A year later, we stood beneath a canopy of string lights and said vows that sounded like instructions for a house that would never shift on its foundation. I believed him. Our neighbor's porch light flickered to life as I rocked Grace back to sleep. 2:07 a.m. The house had a new rhythm. Robert's late nights multiplied and acquired backstories that groomed themselves. A conference call that couldn't be rescheduled, a meeting that ran long, a new client in from out of town who needed handholding and steak. When he came home at 1:14 or 1:37 or 2:03, he smelled like someone else's cologne buried under the polite carapace of mint. He had the sense to shower before climbing into bed. He had the nerve to curl his arm around my waist. Once I lifted his wrist to check the time and saw a text preview half hidden. Brittany, heart, made it home, still smiling. I swallowed air until the urge to rip the sheets off the bed passed and lay still beside a man whose sleep sounded like innocence. In the morning, the kitchen returned to its magazine spread. Robert reset the Bennett family smile and asked about Grace's cough. Emily spun circles and asked if anyone had seen her purple headband. I found it on the back of a chair, smoothed stray hair from her forehead, and packed her lunch like I was signing a peace treaty with Ordinary. Robert kissed the top of my head and said, "You are extraordinary." He said it with an ease that should have felt like balm. It landed like a paper cut. By the time Margaret called to ask if she could stop by with a lemon loaf, I had taught my face to behave. She set it on the counter like it was medicine and asked how the girls were sleeping. She looked at me a beat too long and then glanced around our kitchen as if confirming that every surface gleamed. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." Margaret's gaze didn't blink. "You are good. That is different." She asked where Robert was. "Meeting," I said, which was either true or a wish that had learned how to dress itself. By Sunday afternoon, the house smelled like pancakes and wet grass. A neighbor's lawnmower droned, a soundtrack for denial. Emily and Grace shrieked in the yard, rain boots thudding, their joy loud enough to make me forgive the world for most of its sins. I stood at the sink washing a mixing bowl I could have put in the dishwasher and waited for a voice inside me to stop sounding like I was 9. It didn't. That night, while I folded laundry that had cooled itself into wrinkles, Robert texted from downstairs, a behavior both infuriating and efficient. "Can we talk?" He sat at the kitchen table with his hands steepled, wedding band winking like an inside joke. He did not look scared. He looked prepared. "Elizabeth," he said, each syllable landing like a gavel, "I want a divorce. I'm in love with someone else." The calm clarity of his demand forced me to discover a new kind of stillness. I said, "Okay," a word so small it barely took up breath. He blinked. He had prepared for tears, for argument, for the great female storm. He had not prepared for the forecast to be silent. "Her name is Brittany," he said, offering the asterisk to his thesis. "She understands me." "Does she?" I asked, polite as a hostess offering coffee. He nodded, relieved to be back on the script he had rehearsed. "She does. Then she will understand that you are going to be very generous," I said, and slid a legal pad across the table that already bristled with color-coded flags. "What is this?" he stared, like it had sprouted teeth. "Stabilization," I said. "For Emily and Grace, for the mortgage, for the way this house breathes while we decide what to file and where to lay the papers. Mortgage, utilities, health insurance, your salary covers those for now. I'll handle childcare schedules, school, medical appointments, and my work transitions. We put everything into a holding pattern. We communicate only by email. We never say unkind things in front of witnesses under 4 feet tall. We do not volunteer information to our elders until I say we are ready." He sat very still. Behind him, the kitchen window framed our backyard like a painting, twilight turning the grass to velvet. "I'll have my attorney call you tomorrow," he said, finally stiff. "Good," I said. "Mine will call yours first." He looked at me like a man who had expected to hold an axe and found himself blinking at a scalpel. Sunday smelled of pancakes and wet grass. Emily and Grace shrieked in the yard, their sneakers thudding like punctuation. I brewed coffee strong enough to notarize decisions and opened my laptop to write to a stranger who would become a line item called Freedom. Holloway Family Law, the website said. Clean fonts, firm jawlines, testimonials that sounded like relief. I left a message. They called back within an hour. We spoke for 30 minutes. They spoke like men who had chosen the boring heroics of paperwork over the adrenaline of fights. I liked them immediately. At 2 p.m., I laid out folders on the dining table. Mortgage, utilities, retirement, insurance, school records, and pediatric notes. Stability lives in paper. I gathered it like a mother gathering her children in from the rain. At 4:20, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "This is Brittany. We should talk woman to woman." The audacity. The condescension disguised as generosity. I muted the thread and added the number to a folder called Noise. At 5:05, a different noise. Margaret's name on my screen. I stared at it until the call rolled to voicemail. "Elizabeth, please come by tomorrow morning if you can. I would like to speak with you alone." I stood in our kitchen with a lemon-scented rag in my hand and a new map forming in my mind. Margaret opened the door before I knocked, as though she'd been waiting 3 rooms back and had timed her steps for Grace. Her house smelled like polish and restraint. I clutched a crumpled tissue like a talisman, bracing for pity I couldn't absorb. She gave me none. She gave me a mug and a seat and a straight look. "I was not raised to interfere," she said. "Today I will." I told her what I'd heard in my dining room. I told her what Robert had said at our kitchen table. I did not cry until I said Emily's name. Margaret's face softened. "You will not apologize to me for my son," she said. "I will not allow it." We drank tea like a sacrament. When I set the mug down, she slid a folder across the table, manila worn shiny at the corners. "This is a deed," she said. "I bought a condo years ago after Robert's father's first wandering. He came back. I stayed. But I decided never to be unprepared again. The condo is paid for. It is in my name. It is yours if you want it." I stared at the folder like it might rewrite time. "Margaret," she lifted her chin a fraction, "we are women. We build lifeboats other people pretend not to see." "I can't. You can," she said, "and you will take this retainer agreement as well. Holloway is decent. I already called them. If you want custody arrangements that are humane and firm, you will need counsel. I will pay for it now. If you refuse, I will be offended, which will cost me energy I could use for more useful things." I laughed then, the kind of laugh that startles you into remembering you have a throat. She wasn't finished. "As for Robert, he will learn that love is not an alibi. He will be generous, or I will teach him how to spell the word." "Margaret," I said, helpless and grateful. "Elizabeth," she said, kind and iron. "Quiet is not the same as weak. You will handle this with what you have always had, order. He will mistake it for mercy. Let him." I left with the deed, the retainer agreement, and a list written in Margaret's tidy hand. Call Holloway, transfer utilities, school enrollment confirmations, pediatrician's office, keys. She hugged me at the door like a general blessing a soldier before a battle neither of us had chosen. On the drive home, the light through the live oaks made a moving lace on the road. I felt the old fear reach from my ankle and then miss. Motherhood is armor, not weakness. I would not repeat my mother's silent endurance. Emily laughed in the back seat. Grace sang the wrong words to a commercial jingle and didn't apologize. At a red light, my phone buzzed. "Robert, I'll be late." I typed back, "Will be fine." The period did more work than all the sentences I hadn't written. 2 weeks later, a U-Haul idled at the curb of a red brick mid-rise, the kind that looks like a sensible decision from every angle. The elevator smelled like fresh paint and neighborly distance. Margaret met us at the door with keys and a grocery bag of staples, pasta, jarred sauce, a bag of clementines, and a note that said, "Leave the boxes. Unpack yourselves first." We moved around each other in the little condo like we'd practiced. Emily claimed the bedroom with the bigger window and promised to share. Grace lined up stuffed animals along a baseboard like a fuzzy border patrol. I placed the deed in a file beside the retainer agreement and the school confirmations and the pediatrician's note. Stability isn't a feeling. It's a pile of paper and a working lock. That night, when the girls fell asleep in a tangle of limbs and bravery, I stood on the small patio and watched the city be itself. Traffic, porch lights, a siren far away trying to matter. My phone buzzed on the table inside. "Robert." I let it ring out. Seconds later, a voicemail icon glowed. Heart hammering, I pressed play. Robert's voice, strained, unfamiliar, poured through the speaker. "Dad, things are complicated." A beat of static. "Please." Click. My pulse spiked, but fear didn't follow. Complicated was the kind of word men used when they realized maps were not the same as the ground. I turned off the phone, slid the patio door shut, and returned to the quiet. On the foyer console sat the brass condo keys, resting atop the folder labeled Home. The ventilation hummed its practical hum. The girls snored softly. The pipes sang their small, honest song. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, sleep felt like an ally instead of a flight risk.